When the first light of dawn touched the high desert observatory, the world was still unaware that a discovery was moments away from rewriting the boundaries of human imagination. The telescope dome groaned as it opened, metal hinges breathing in the cold morning air. Inside, Dr. Elias Rand stood quietly, hands folded behind his back, staring at the star maps he had memorized since his earliest years. He had spent a lifetime searching for anomalies, those faint glimmers of cosmic irregularities that whispered stories of forgotten origins. Today was meant to be routine. Another morning spent cataloging objects drifting like silent pollen across the solar winds. Yet something about the sky felt different to him, as though the universe were holding its breath. He stepped toward the control console, fingers tapping ancient habits across the keys, and brought the first sweep of the sky onto the observatory's primary screen. His assistant, Mara, entered moments later, her hair tied up hastily, still fighting sleep. She greeted him softly, but stopped mid-sentence when she saw the intensity on his face. A faint trail had appeared in the peripheral edge of the telescope's imaging field, a sliver of motion, almost imperceptible, so dim that even the software struggled to recognize it as anything more than background noise. Yet Elias leaned closer, narrowing his eyes, sensing something extraordinary buried within the pixels. "Magnify this region," he whispered. Mara complied, and the grainy patch expanded. A faint streak sharpened, then brightened, then pulsed with a peculiar rhythm, as though the light were not merely reflected sunlight, but something deeper, older, echoing from the shadowed boundary between detection and erasure. Elias studied the light curve carefully. It didn't match any known asteroid class, not the tumbling carbonaceous bodies, nor the metallic fragments that drifted like the bones of broken planets. This object moved with deliberate irregularity, like a lost traveler adjusting its course through a void too large for comprehension. A chill ran down Mara's spine. "Is it artificial?" Elias shook his head slowly. "No, or at least it shouldn't be." He zoomed in again, calculating its path. Its orbit didn't align with any documented family, nor did its reflectivity resemble standard albedo patterns. It behaved like a ghost, slipping through gravitational fields as though guided by unseen hands. The more they analyzed it, the more unreal it felt. The observatory room seemed to shrink as the weight of the unknown pressed inward. "Log a new object," Elias said. "Designation R9X." Mara hesitated. "Are you sure?" The naming process, reserved for objects of significance, demanded certainty, and the atmosphere around them felt anything but certain. Yet Elias nodded, pressing the confirmation key himself. The screen flickered, and R9X joined the provisional catalog, a newborn entry in humanity's growing map of the cosmos. They continued tracking it through the morning. Each new observation made the mystery deepen. Its velocity increased without visible cause, then slowed again, as though adjusting its rhythm with the spinning of invisible gears. Elias tried countless models, plugging numbers into equations that had explained the motions of wanderers for centuries. Nothing worked. The asteroid behaved as though the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. By midday, clouds rolled across the desert. The telescope was forced to rest, but Elias remained staring at static-filled screens, as if the object's last position concealed secrets he refused to ignore. Mara brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the room, but did nothing to cut through the tension. "What do you think it is?" she asked finally. Elias exhaled, weary yet electrified. "I think," he said, "we found something that doesn't want to be found." And as the storm gathered overhead, the universe held tight to the enigma of R9X, an enigma that would soon spiral into obsession, fear, revelation, and a darkness that would haunt them long after the asteroid vanished. Night returned with a violent clarity. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky polished and sharp, as if the cosmos were eager to reveal the next piece of its puzzle. Elias hurried back to the observatory, Mara close behind, both driven by an urgency neither fully understood. The moment the dome reopened, The telescope resumed its celestial sweep, immediately locking onto the coordinates where our 9X had last been seen. But the screen was empty. Not blank, simply unchanged, calm, ordinary. The star field lay quiet, every point of light exactly where it had been the night before, except for the one that should have been there. Elias rubbed his eyes, convinced he had miscalculated, that sleep deprivation had played tricks on him. He ran the coordinates again, and again, and again. Nothing. It can't just disappear, Mara murmured, leaning over the console. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up archived data. She replayed yesterday's images. The streak of light glowed unmistakably, then vanished as the sequence ended. The present field showed no trace of motion, as though our 9X had slipped into a dimension their eyes could not follow. Try widening the scan radius, Elias said. They expanded the search, then doubled it, tripled it, swept across entire swaths of sky that would have required impossible velocity to traverse in a single day. Still nothing. Our 9X had evaporated. It had left no trail, no dust plume, no gravitational signature. It was as if the universe had undone the moment it briefly allowed itself to be seen. Mara looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Do we hallucinate it? He shook his head sharply. Data doesn't hallucinate. Yet deep inside, a seed of doubt began growing. If an object could appear and vanish without explanation, then their understanding of celestial mechanics was incomplete, frighteningly incomplete. Elias contacted several other observatories, transmitting coordinates and image logs. Hours later, replies trickled in. None had seen our 9X. None had recorded anomalies. Some politely questioned the validity of the data. Others ignored the message entirely. Elias felt isolated, as though he stood at the threshold of a truth too heavy for the scientific community to embrace. The night grew colder. The desert wind howled. He stared at the blank sky until dawn, feeling as though the vanishing had not been a natural occurrence, but a deliberate act, a cosmic decision to hide. Days passed. They continued searching. The data from that first morning became their only tether to the mystery, a single thread connecting them to a puzzle that refused to reveal its shape. News slowly began circulating. Rumors, whispers among astronomers, speculative blogs. An asteroid that appeared once and never again. A phantom rock. A cosmic glitch. Elias refused to let it fade into myth. Every night, he returned to the telescope. Every morning, he reviewed charts until his vision blurred. He traced orbital patterns that led nowhere, questioned constants he once considered unquestionable, and began to sense something deeply unsettling. The asteroid had not simply moved. It had withdrawn, as if it possessed an agency beyond mere celestial drift. One night, Mara found him asleep on the observatory floor, calculations scattered around him like fallen leaves. His dreams were haunted by images of our 9X, not as a rock, but as an eye staring back, ancient and knowing. When he awoke, he whispered a single sentence that chilled Mara to her core. It's still out there, and it's watching us. And so began the obsession that would consume their lives, draw attention from corners of the world they wished had never noticed, and lead them down a path into darkness, where the vanishing of the asteroid was only the first of many impossibilities. The world beyond the observatory began to stir with curiosity. Blogs shared the story. Amateur astronomers debated it. Some dismissed it as flawed data, others as clickbait fantasy, and still others claimed it was evidence of extraterrestrial presence. Elias had expected skepticism, but the sudden attention felt intrusive, as if the asteroid's disappearance had become a public spectacle rather than a scientific anomaly. He avoided interviews, but Mara convinced him to publish a formal report, hoping that peer review might at least legitimize the observation. The paper circulated quietly at first, drawing interested eyes but careful responses. Yet not all readers approached it with scientific neutrality. A letter arrived addressed to Elias, written in precise handwriting. Your object resembles one described in 1894 by Street Pearson Observatory. They too lost it after one night. Attached was a photocopy of a brittle, yellowed page. The report described an object with a fluctuating brightness and irregular trajectory, the same peculiarities of our 9X. Yet the most disturbing detail was the final sentence. It drifted in a shadow and did not return. We advise no further pursuit. Elias' pulse quickened. He reread the document repeatedly. If astronomers over a century earlier had recorded a similar object, then our 9X was not unique. Or worse, it was the same object. How can a rock disappear for over 100 years and come back? Mara asked, incredulous. Elias didn't answer, because the truth he feared was far more disturbing. Perhaps it hadn't disappeared at all. Perhaps it moved in ways they couldn't follow, slipping in and out of detectable reality like a ghost weaving through the seams of space-time. He contacted museums, archives, and retired astronomers. Most responded politely. A few sent cryptic references to transient intruders. Observe in obscure 19th-century star logs. One message arrived without a return address. Stop looking. It knows. Mara dismissed it as trolling, but Elias felt an unshakable awareness growing around him, as though his thoughts were being listened to by something not bound by human senses. He found himself glancing over his shoulder more often. At night, he dreamt of the asteroid hovering above Earth, not in space, but impossibly close, its surface pulsing like a heartbeat. Weeks turned into months. The world moved on, but Elias' obsession did not. He reinvestigated every fragment of the original data, searching for hidden patterns, changes in brightness that might encode information, irregular drift that could be a signal, anything that might suggest purpose. What he found was worse than randomness. It was rhythm. A rhythm too slow for human intuition, too subtle for conventional algorithms. It pulsed in intervals consistent with neither natural tumbling nor reflective irregularity. It pulsed like something alive. Elias tried to share his findings with Mara, but she was losing patience. The observatory's funding was threatened as Elias neglected grant renewals. Bills piled up. When he proposed expanding their equipment to search for dimensional distortions, Mara nearly quit. She confronted him, voice trembling with frustration, telling him that he was chasing a shadow. He stared back at her, eyes hollow, and whispered, "Shadows don't chase back." At that moment, a sharp alarm rang across the console. Mara turned, startled. The telescope had automatically flagged a faint movement near the original coordinates. A flicker, a pulse. For the first time in months, our 9X had reappeared, but only for a single frame. 10.03-second capture. Then gone again. Elias stood frozen. Mara began to tremble. Because the object's brightness curve in that single frame matched the same arc from their first observation, as if the asteroid had resumed the exact moment it had left, ignoring the months that had passed, as though time itself meant nothing to it, as though it had returned only to remind them. It was not finished. Elias stood motionless as the single frame remained frozen on the screen, the faint speck of our 9X suspended like a grain of unreal dust against an ocean of stars. To anyone else, it would have been meaningless noise, but to Elias and Mara, it was the return of a ghost, a confirmation that the universe had not played a trick on them, a warning that something old and unnameable still lingered, watching patient. Mara exhaled shakily and leaned closer to the monitor, adjusting brightness curves and contrast filters in the desperate hope of revealing more detail. The enhancement sharpened the object's edges, but not in a way that made sense. Instead of an irregular shape typical of asteroids, the contours showed unusual symmetry. Not perfect, not geometric, but suggestive of structure. Something fractured yet intentional. Almost like architecture eroded by cosmic time. "That's impossible," Mara whispered. "Asteroids aren't shaped like this." Elias said nothing. He stared until his vision burned, trying to piece together what the shape implied. His pulse quickened with equal parts dread and fascination. Whatever our 9X it defied classification. The object didn't just break rules. It seemed to ignore them as though it came from a place where physics moved to a different rhythm. What if it's not from here? Mara murmured. Elias turned slowly. The idea was not new to him, but hearing it aloud made his breath catch. If our 9X originated outside the solar system, or outside normal space entirely, then its vanishing might not be motion, but transition. A shifting across boundaries humans didn't understand. He pulled up old data sets, comparing brightness fluctuations across the two sightings. The curve was identical, not similar, but identical down to the smallest noise signature. That kind of replication could not occur by natural means. It was as if the asteroid had paused its existence and resumed it later, like an image frozen by a cosmic hand. Mara backed away from the screen. Elias, what if we weren't supposed to see it? He felt that too. The entire event. The first appearance, the disappearance, the reappearance for a single frame, felt intentional. Not like behavior, but like response. He checked the telescope logs. The reappearance had occurred precisely when the telescope was scanning the same path as the first night. The same angle, the same rotational phase, the same time of night. It was almost as if the asteroid had waited for them. This realization unsettled Elias in a way he wasn't prepared to admit. Mara retreated to her desk, opening old emails and warning messages, rereading the anonymous note that had warned them to stop searching. The feeling in the room thickened with an oppressive weight, like the air before a violent storm. That night, they both stayed at the observatory. Sleep eluded them. The desert outside hummed with an eerie stillness, and every gust of wind against the dome felt like the whisper of something just beyond the threshold of sight. Elias kept replaying the image frame, convinced that if he stared long enough, it would reveal additional secrets. But the more he looked, the more he felt the object staring back. By dawn, shadows stretched long across the sand, and exhaustion clouded their thoughts. Elias finally stood, rubbing his eyes. "We need help," he said. Mara looked up, surprised. Elias rarely sought outside support. But this mystery exceeded their tools, their knowledge, and their capacity to reason. They needed expertise in gravitational anomalies, quantum detection, astrophysical anomalies, and perhaps people who had knowledge far older than academia. Elias contacted an old colleague, Dr. Kyra Hale, a specialist in exotic space-time phenomena. She had once proposed that certain deep space objects moved through layers of reality like a stone skipping across a pond. Her ideas had been mocked, but Elias now saw brilliance in what others dismissed. Kyra agreed to visit. Kyra Hale stepped into the observatory with sharp eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who lived comfortably on the edge of accepted science. She studied Elias and Mara, reading their exhaustion, their obsession, their fear. She did not judge. Instead, she went directly to the console. "Show me everything." Elias explained the timeline. The first detection, the anomalies, the disappearance, the single-frame reappearance. Kyra listened attentively, her mind racing as she viewed the data. When an enhanced image appeared on screen, her eyebrows raised slightly. "That's not a natural object," she said calmly. Mara's breath caught. Elias felt a mixture of validation and dread. Kyra leaned closer. "This brightness symmetry is deliberate, not mechanical, but patterned." "Pattern how?" Elias asked. Kyra nodded toward the pulsing arc of brightness. "This is not reflection. It's emission. Something about this object produces its own light or redirects it, according to rules we don't understand." Mara swallowed hard. "So you think it's alive?" Kyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped on the console, running spectral decomposition on the faint light captured in the frame. The results were unsettling. The emission spectrum did not match rock, metal, or ice. Instead, it contained traces of energy signatures associated with high-energy particle interactions, the kind typically found near exotic cosmic phenomena. "This asteroid behaves like something stepping in and out of our physical layer," Kyra said. "Not teleportation, not cloaking, just slipping between states. Elias frowned. But why? And why show itself to us at all? Kyra studied him carefully. You ever consider that you didn't discover it? That it allowed itself to be seen? Mara backed away from the console, shaking her head slowly. But why us? Kyra's eyes softened with something that resembled sympathy. Maybe because you were looking. The atmosphere in the observatory thickened. Silence swallowed the room. Elias felt an invisible thread pulling him deeper into the mystery, binding him to something beyond comprehension. Kyra instructed them to run time-match scans for the next several nights, aiming the telescope at the exact same spot under identical conditions. If the object behaved predictably, it might appear again. But predictability was not something our 9X seemed interested in. They waited for nightfall. The hours crept by with slow, oppressive weight. The clock ticked with infuriating loudness. Elias stared out the dome's open slit into the vast abyss of black and diamond. Mara paced restlessly. Kyra made notes, diagrams, strange equations that spiraled into chaotic webs across paper. At 2:14 a.m., the telescope pinged. A faint movement. A pulse. Elias lunged toward the console. The object was back, this time for 2 frames. The shape was clearer, elongated, fractured, like a monolithic shard broken from something unimaginably vast. It rotated slowly, but its rotation did not correspond to classical tumbling. It shifted in segments, as if parts of its structure phased in and out. Kyra inhaled sharply. That's no asteroid. Elias whispered. Then what is it? Kyra stared at the shifting, ghost-like form. A remnant, she murmured. A fragment of something older than our solar system. Something not bound to our reality. Mara felt her knees weaken. Why is it here? Kyra turned to Elias. That's what we need to find out. Outside, the desert wind grew colder. Somewhere in the invisible gulf between stars, a presence stirred, aware of their attention. And the vanishing object had begun to return. Not fully. Not yet. But piece by piece, like a memory surfacing from the abyss. The next days blurred into sleepless nights and feverish calculations. Elias, Mara, and Kyra worked like archaeologists, unearthing a relic buried in the fabric of space itself. Each reappearance of R9X, sometimes a few frames, sometimes a faint shimmer of distortion, revealed more about its strange structure and behavior. The object seemed composed of interlocking layers, each phasing in and out of physical space independently. At times, one layer appeared while the others vanished, creating the illusion of a shifting, flickering entity torn between realities. Kyra compared it to geological strata, but instead of sediment, these layers were temporal, slices of time stacked like pages in a book only partially visible. The asteroid was not merely moving through space. It was moving through different versions of itself. Mara grew increasingly disturbed. This thing isn't just vanishing, she said one night. It's changing its state of existence. Elias felt the same fear. The object's erratic behavior suggested intelligence, intention, or at least a process guided by principles far more complex than orbital mechanics. Then the breakthrough came. Kyra discovered that each reappearance occurred at mathematically precise intervals, not in linear time, but in exponential steps. The object's visibility followed a pattern like a heartbeat accelerating. It's trying to stabilize, Kyra said. Or synchronize. Synchronize with what? Mara demanded. Kyra looked at Elias. You. The words hung in the air like a fatal prophecy. Kyra explained that the object's visibility spikes aligned with moments when Elias ran analyses on its previous frames, as though it reacted to observation. Not metaphorically, but literally. Mara stared in disbelief. You're saying it's responding to him? Kyra nodded. Quantum systems react to measurement. But this is far beyond that. It's responding to attention. Elias felt cold. Why me? Because you were the first one to see it. Kyra said, you created the observational imprint. To the object, you're a reference point. Elias stepped back, heart pounding. The idea that something in the depths of space was aware of him, connected to him, felt like stepping into a nightmare. Kyra continued, "If it's synchronizing with you, then eventually it may fully appear." Mara paled. "And what happens then?" Kyra hesitated before answering. "I don't know." The next night, things escalated. At 3:29 a.m., the telescope captured the clearest image yet. Not just a frame, not just a flicker, 3 seconds of continuous visibility. Long enough for the object's surface to reveal impossible detail. Labyrinthine grooves resembling circuitry, crystalline ridges pulsing with faint light, and fractures that seemed to leak darkness rather than shadow. Elias stared, breath stolen. Mara covered her mouth. Kyra whispered something too quiet to hear. Then something worse happened. The telescope recorded a momentary drop in background starlight, as if stars behind the object dimmed, distorted, then snapped back into place. Space itself had warped. Kyra's voice trembled. "It's manipulating the fabric around it." Mara pressed a shaking hand against the console. "This thing isn't an asteroid. It's a machine." Kyra nodded slowly. "A machine older than human civilization. Maybe older than the solar system." Elias felt a dawning terror. "And it's waking up." Outside, the desert night felt suddenly alive, humming with a frequency they couldn't hear but felt deep within their bones. R9X was no longer just appearing. It was approaching, or answering. Sleep became an abstraction. Elias drifted between waking and dreaming, haunted by visions of the object, its fractured geometry, its spectral glow, its silent pull. Each night, the telescope captured longer appearances. Each time, the object grew closer, though its distance remained immeasurable, as if normal space could not fully imprison it. On the 10th night of continuous monitoring, something unprecedented occurred. The object appeared for nearly a full minute. It hovered against the starry backdrop like an ancient shard torn from the bones of a forgotten celestial titan. Its surface glimmered with patterns that shifted like runes dissolving and reforming. Elias felt a vibration in the air, not sound, but a pressure behind reality itself, a resonance sinking into his mind like an unwanted melody. Kyra noticed his expression. "Elias, what do you hear?" He hesitated. "It's not sound. It's like thoughts, but not mine. Patterns. A call." Mara looked horrified. "It's communicating with you?" Elias didn't answer, because deep inside, he already knew the truth. The object had chosen him. Kyra studied the data. "It's aligning with your brain's electromagnetic signature, your thought patterns. You become a beacon for it." Elias felt faint. "Then how do I shut it off?" Kyra looked at him with grim resignation. "You can't." The minute ended. The object vanished again, slipping through the veil of space-time like a predator diving into dark water. But something lingered. A faint afterimage burned onto the telescope sensors. A pulse in the observatory's electronics. A quiet hum in Elias' mind. Over the next days, he began experiencing hallucinations or visions. He saw the object in his dreams, but not in space. Instead, he saw it resting in a barren landscape, half buried in ash, surrounded by ruins of alien structures impossible in scale. He saw a civilization extinguished in silence. He saw the object falling through space for eons, drifting like the shard of a dead god. And he saw something else. A presence inside the object, watching, waiting, learning him. Kyra studied his brain activity during these episodes, horrified to find patterns of interference, signals that did not originate from any natural neural process. Elias' mind had become entangled with something vast and ancient. "It's rewriting him," Kyra whispered. "Or trying to." Mara demanded they shut down the telescope and the project destroy all data. But by then it was too late. Something had crossed the boundary between worlds, drawn by the act of observation. Elias knew it too. "No," he said quietly. "We have to see this through." That night, the object returned again. And this time, it didn't vanish. It moved toward them. The night after the task force meeting, Arjun found himself unable to sleep. His apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on the chest like a weight. He kept seeing the reconstructed orbit lines in his mind, threads of pale blue, yellow, and red streaking across Earth's gravitational field, splitting into uncertainties, dissolving into nothing. Every time he blinked, he saw the same divergence point, the same vanishing moment, the same silence in the data after. It was unnatural for an asteroid to do that. Even a fragmenting object left clues. Even a tumbling shard reflected sunlight. But this asteroid, Object S, had slipped out of existence like a whispered word carried off by the wind. He got up and opened his laptop. The glow illuminated the room with a soft, sterile blue. He opened the orbital simulation software again. Technically, he wasn't supposed to run these models without clearing them through the team, but he needed answers more than sleep. He loaded the 3 confirmed observation points and the supplementary infrared trace Helena had recovered. Then he did something no one on the task force had done yet. He asked the computer to run projections assuming non-gravitational accelerations. In other words, he asked the computer to model the asteroid as if it were being pushed by some force that wasn't gravity. Comets experienced non-gravitational forces all the time. Outgassing, jets of vapor, sublimation. But the problem was simple. Object S wasn't a comet. It had no coma, no spectral signatures of ice, no tail. But when he ran the simulation, something terrifying happened. The asteroid's path aligned perfectly. Only if he added a small outward acceleration, as if the object were releasing gas or being propelled. His stomach tightened. That would imply one of 2 things. Either Object S had physics no known asteroid had, or it wasn't an asteroid at all. Arjun stared at the screen for several minutes, frozen. He tried to tell himself that this was just a mathematical fluke, a quirk, a coincidence. But as he reran the model again and again, with tiny variations, new assumptions, different orbital methods, the answer remained the same. Object S had accelerated. A natural asteroid should not accelerate. And if it did accelerate, it should leave a signature. But it had left nothing. The silence surrounding Object S was beginning to feel deliberate. He tried to calm himself, breathing deeply, counting back from 10. Science demanded discipline. It demanded caution. It demanded skepticism. But it also demanded honesty. And the honest conclusion was that Object S had behaved as if it were being controlled. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thinner, as if he had discovered something he wasn't meant to know. He saved the file, encrypted it, and shut the laptop. He knew the implications. He knew the danger. Not to the planet, but to reputations, to institutions, to everything science had built on the foundation of predictable celestial mechanics. He whispered into the dark room, as though speaking too loudly might summon something. This can't be right. But the numbers didn't lie, and numbers had always been the one thing he trusted without fear. The next morning, Arjun walked into the observatory expecting to feel unsettled. Instead, he felt something else watched. The staff were behaving normally, but there was an odd tension in the halls. People glanced at him too quickly. Conversations stopped when he passed. He had been part of the institution long enough to know when. Something unspoken was circulating. He reached the main corridor and found Helena waiting for him against the wall. She looked sleep-deprived, her hair tied back messily, her posture stiff from too many hours at a computer. She nodded silently, motioning for him to follow her into a small processing room. When the door shut behind them, she exhaled sharply. "Someone leaked part of our internal report," she said. He felt his pulse spike. What part? The part mentioning that Object S deviated from its projected path. Arjun felt the blood drain from his face. "Helena, that was preliminary. I know," she said quickly. "But someone got it. And now rumors are spreading across 2 research institutes. I just got an encrypted message from a colleague in Chile asking if we had discovered a maneuvering asteroid." He stiffened. That was too close to what he had calculated last night. "Who has access to the report?" he asked. "Only the task force," she replied. "And none of them would leak this." Which means she didn't finish. They both knew what it meant. Somebody else, someone outside the room, was already monitoring their work. Arjun leaned against the processing table, trying to steady himself. He felt a rare flicker of fear. Not fear of the asteroid, but fear of human interference. If word spread that they had discovered an object capable of maneuvering, the scientific world would implode with speculation. Governments would panic. Conspiracy theorists would cannibalize every detail. What exactly did the message say? He finally asked. Helena folded her arms, eyes narrowing. They asked if it was the same object referenced in the 2003 classified NASA brief. Arjun stood up straight. There was number 2003 brief about a maneuvering object. That's what I thought, she said, until I checked departmental logs. And her voice dropped to a whisper. There was a classified file, and it was deleted from the archive 10 years ago. He felt a chill. Deleted files always left a trace. They had to. Even if the contents were erased, the metadata remained, the ghost of the file. Do you think it was the same kind of object? He asked quietly. I don't know, she said. But whatever Object S was, this isn't the first time something has vanished after discovery. For a moment, they both stood still, absorbing the weight of that idea. The asteroid that shouldn't have vanished was now entangled with a file that shouldn't have existed. Something was wrong, and the more they looked, the deeper the wrongness went. Arjun and Helena spent the next 48 hours scanning every inch of space where Object S might have drifted. They reprocessed data, recalibrated instruments, re-examined faint objects that had been dismissed as noise. They even checked for reflections from derelict satellites. Nothing. The nights were long. The stars felt sharper, colder. Every constellation seemed to watch them with indifferent eyes. The old observatory air vents hummed like a distant mechanical breath. It was in that hollow silence that Arjun began to feel a strange contradiction. The more they searched, the more it felt like Object S was intentionally avoiding detection. And that feeling disturbed him more than any scientific anomaly. On the third night, something unusual happened. Arjun was staring at a blank patch of sky when a faint, flickering glint appeared. So soft it could have been a cosmic ray hit on the CCD. He zoomed in. Enhanced contrast. No shape emerged. No structure. Just a glint. It lasted 1 second. Then it vanished as abruptly as it came. He replayed the frame sequence. Same results. Same brightness. Same brief spark. Helena leaned over his shoulder. Could be debris, she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Or Object S, he whispered. Or nothing at all. They save the frame anyway. Human eyes can deceive. Sensors can glitch. But the universe rarely flickers without reason. Arjun looked back up from the monitor at the sky outside the glass dome. For the first time since the discovery, the night sky didn't feel like a field of infinite stars. It felt like a veil hiding something behind it, something that had learned how to remain unseen. 3 days later, Dr. Kirsanova called an emergency meeting. The entire task force gathered in the observatory's old lecture hall. The atmosphere was heavy with worry. Piles of printed data lay scattered across the long table, overlapping like drifting continents. Kirsanova didn't waste time. "We've discovered a pattern," she said. Everyone leaned forward. She held up a graph, a synchronized plot of 3 asteroid discoveries from 1986, 2003, and 2011. Each discovery had the same signature, a faint object spotted in a highly unstable orbit, followed by a rapid fade in signal, followed by complete disappearance. "We believe," she continued, "that these objects were physically real. But after a few hours of detection, they vanished from the sky in ways no asteroid should." Murmurs rippled across the room. "We are not dealing with natural randomness," she said firmly. "This is a repeating phenomenon." Arjun studied the plots carefully. The similarities were startling. Each object appeared out of nowhere, moved in a partially hyperbolic trajectory, accelerated slightly, then vanished abruptly. He looked up, meeting Helena's eyes. She already understood what he was thinking. These weren't 3 separate anomalies. They were part of a single pattern spanning 40 years. Someone raised a hand. "Are we suggesting these objects are artificial?" Kirsanova's jaw tightened. "We are suggesting nothing. We are investigating." But the silence that followed said more than words. The thought had entered everyone's mind, and no one could ignore it anymore. That night, A private meeting was held between Kirsanova, Arjun, Helena, and two representatives from a national space agency. The tone was different, colder, more methodical, like a room preparing for surgery. The agency representatives spread classified documents across the desk. Most were heavily redacted, but enough remained visible to cause a knot to form in Arjun's stomach. There were witness reports from military tracking stations, logs of unknown objects displaying brief periods of acceleration, unexplained radar contacts lasting seconds. Even one report from 1998 describing an object that blinked out of tracking range mid-trajectory. These events, one official said, have always been dismissed as sensor errors, but your findings suggest they may be related. Arjun felt an internal battle raging. Science demanded evidence, but evidence was lacking. All he had were patterns, coincidences, whispers of anomalies. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked. "Confirmation," the official replied. "We want to know whether Object S is part of something larger. If there is coordination." "Coordination?" Helena repeated. The official hesitated. "Objects that appear, move unpredictably, then disappear can indicate intent." Intent. It was a word no scientist ever wanted associated with celestial objects. But the official wasn't finished. "And we need to know," he said slowly, "whether these objects are observing us." Arjun inhaled sharply. For the first time, this no longer felt like a scientific investigation. It felt like a confrontation with something unknown, something that had been happening quietly for decades, unnoticed by the world. Something, or someone, had been visiting Earth's skies, and vanishing before anyone could understand why. Arjun spent the next several nights alone in the observatory, lost in thought. He tried to return to logic, numbers, orbital mechanics, the familiar languages that grounded him. But the theory forming in his mind refused to leave. What if these objects were not natural? What if they were probes? What if they were reconnaissance instruments, designed to observe silently and retreat without detection? He tried to dismiss the idea. It felt too speculative, too cinematic. Yet every data point he had collected pushed him toward it. If Object S was artificial, then its faint appearance made sense, minimized detection. Its slight acceleration made sense, course correction. Its disappearance made sense. Leave before higher-resolution telescopes locked on. The decades-long pattern made sense, periodic checks. Everything fit too well. He stared at the sky through the dome, feeling small, vulnerable. Humanity had always assumed that if extraterrestrial intelligence visited, it would be dramatic. Monolithic ships, unmistakable signals, unmistakable intentions. But what if intelligence chose subtlety? What if the galaxy was full of silent observers? What if Object S was not a threat, not a message, but a routine survey, a cosmic census, a quiet check on a developing species? He felt a chill not from fear, but from awe. For centuries, humanity had looked at the stars and wondered if it was alone. But what if the answer had been drifting past for decades? Small, faint, maneuverable objects that slipped away before humans realized what they were. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. A week after the private meeting, just when the investigation began slowing, something extraordinary happened. A faint radio signal was detected, so faint that it was nearly indistinguishable from background noise. It came from the region where Object S had vanished, the same area Arjun had stared at for weeks. He and Helena ran the analysis together. The frequency was unusual, not typical of pulsars, quasars, solar interference, or any known natural spectrum. It was short, structured, and repeated twice before fading into silence. But the most startling part was timing. The signal came exactly 11 days after Object S disappeared. The same interval recorded in two of the earlier historical cases. A pattern, not strong enough to be called communication, but not random enough to be dismissed. When Helena processed the waveform, she whispered, "It's too organized." They both stared at the screen. The signal was simple, symmetrical, repeating, a brief rising tone followed by two descending tones. Not enough to encode language, but enough to imply something. "This isn't natural," Arjun said quietly. No one argued otherwise. For the first time in the entire investigation, they had something tangible, a trace, a signature, a whisper from the void. It was as if Object S had left a footprint, or a confirmation, or goodbye. 3 months after the disappearance, the task force compiled their findings into a classified report. It was the most honest document Arjun had ever helped write. It did not speculate wildly. It did not offer conclusions it couldn't defend. It simply stated the facts. Object S existed. It accelerated. It disappeared. Similar objects had been seen before. Signals were detected in coordinated intervals. No natural explanation was consistent with all data. The final line of the report, written by Kirsanova herself, read, "We may be witnessing a class of unidentified, non-natural near-Earth objects. Not aliens, not probes, not visitors, just unidentified, non-natural objects." The scientific community would debate it for decades. Governments would classify it, bury it, dissect it behind closed doors. But the truth, as Arjun knew deep in his bones, was simpler. Object S was part of something humanity did not yet understand. Something old, something patient, something observant. And though the world never saw it again, he often caught himself gazing up at the night sky, wondering if it, or something like it, was still out there, watching silently from the shadows between the stars. Not hostile, not benevolent, just curious. And in that vast cosmic quiet, perhaps curiosity was the greatest bridge between civilizations. The observatory fell into a deep, expectant quiet as Arjun and Helena stared at the drifting point of light. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The silence between them was thick with understanding, the kind that comes when two people finally realize they are standing on the edge of something far larger than themselves. Outside, the night spread across the desert like an ocean of ink. The wind carried grains of sand across the ground, whispering along the concrete walls as though the earth itself sensed a shift approaching. The faint object continued its slow motion across the sky map, indifferent to the chaos it had caused in human institutions, untouched by the secrecy that had smothered its predecessors. It simply moved, patient and unhurried. Arjun leaned back in his chair, letting his breath settle. Months of sleepless nights, closed-door meetings, warning letters, and classified interference. All of it suddenly felt small. The universe was not hiding secrets out of malice. It simply existed in its own unfathomable rhythm, and humanity was only just beginning to perceive its subtleties. Helena closed her laptop, leaving the drifting point of light frozen in their memory. "We were never meant to stop looking," she said quietly. "That's why it keeps coming back. Not for governments, not for committees, for us, for anyone who's willing to see." Arjun nodded slowly. The fear he once felt had softened into something else. Reverence, perhaps. A sense of responsibility. The objects were not intruders, not threats, not omens. They were reminders. Humanity was not alone in the universe, nor was it the center of it. The cosmos was vast, ancient, and full of watchers, some distant, some curious, all far beyond the reach of human politics or secrecy. He stood and approached the great telescope, resting his hand against the cold metal frame. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. The unknown was no longer something to fear, but something to follow, something to learn from. Helena joined him, standing at his side. Together, they gazed up through the open dome, into a sky filled with quiet, patient stars. Somewhere out there, the vanished objects drifted, observing, recording, waiting for the next moment humanity became interesting enough to check on again. The universe did not hide from them today. It simply reminded them that discovery is never a single moment, but a long, winding journey. And as the night deepened, Arjun spoke the last words of the investigation that never truly ended. "We'll keep watching." Helena smiled faintly. "And maybe one day, they'll let us see why." The desert wind moved softly across the observatory. The stars shimmered with ancient light. And far above, in the vast black ocean, something glinted once, so faintly it could have been nothing at all, then slipped back into the darkness. Not gone, just waiting.